Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to dig a little deeper into the three most common light sources that we use in our buildings, and they are incandescent lamps, fluorescent lamps, and LED lamps. So incandescent lamps are our oldest electrical light source, and they're very popular because they provide the greatest amount of flexibility and they provide a familiar, very warm toned light. All right. Um, the the incandescent lamps are measured in watts. So if you grew up here in the US, you may be very familiar with a 40-watt bulb, a 60-watt bulb, a 100-watt bulb, etc., and how much light those different bulbs put out. All right. And finally, as we talked about in the last video, incandescent lamps are the lowest efficacy light source. All right, and they definitely do not count as a high efficacy lamp in the energy code, and we'll talk about that later in this lecture. One of the reasons that incandescents are popular is that they are very tunable. You can control their beam spread as shown in these illustrations here. All right, so here's one with a variable beam spread from spotlight to floodlight. And your textbook gives a pretty good illustration of these different beam spreads. So please go take a look. Let's move on to fluorescent lamps. Fluorescents are energy efficient, okay? They are a much higher efficacy than incandescent. They also can produce a high lumen output. They can be quite bright. Okay. Fluorescent lamps have a long life. You don't have to replace them very often. And they produce very little heat, which is also important for sustainability, remember. All right. Fluorescent lamps have a low initial cost, they're inexpensive, and they also have a low operating cost. These are very important points. And finally, they have a variety of color options. All right. It used to be that fluorescent lamps were very, very cold. They were very cold and blue, greeny lights. All right. And also that they were you couldn't control them. You couldn't put any kind of dimmer or basically they were on and off only. All right, the technology has improved. There are a wide range of colors, color rendering, okay, and you can now get high color rendering fluorescent lamps in warm tones with dimmable ballasts. Speaking of ballasts, the way that incandescent lamps work is there is a filament inside that heats up, it glows and produces light. Fluorescent lamps are different. They don't use filaments and they require a ballast. So here's take a look at this is a fluorescent lamp or tube right here. Here is the ballast, kind of a rectangular looking thing. Here is a picture of a specific fluorescent luminaire. All right, so this is the mounting or the housing. The lamp will fit between these two sockets right there at the ends, and they've tucked the ballast, that rectangular piece right there, kind of into the housing. There's many, many choices of fluorescent lamp sizes and shapes, and your textbook has a great illustration of them here. Most of them are tubes because of the way that this technology works, but sometimes the tubes are bent in U shapes or circles. All right, and they come in different lengths and different sizes. The very most common ones are T8s and T5s. All right, and you can see their diameters here. So a T8 is a 1-inch diameter and a T5 is a 5/8 inch diameter. And they very typically come in standard lengths of, for example, 1 foot, 2 foot, or 4 feet. Speaking of fluorescence, let's talk about compact fluorescents, or CFLs, you can see them named as. The benefit for a compact fluorescent is that they can be swapped out in fixtures, in luminaires that were built for incandescent. All right, so you can swap these bulbs out. The disadvantage, the con, is that because it's a fluorescent, it needs a ballast. And so that ballast either has to be built into the bulb itself or the fixture. All right, and you can see in this example down here, see these bulky bases at the bottom of these bulbs? That's the ballast piece. All right. Fluorescent lamps are more difficult to control than incandescents, and some of them don't dim. All right. Although compact fluorescents are a good choice for swapping out with existing fixtures, LEDs are far more popular, especially for new fixtures. So let's talk about them next. LEDs are solid state technology, and what they are, let's take a look here, is a little semiconductor chip, all right, set into a housing, all right there, and it's got a lens over it to distribute the light, all right, and underneath it is a heat sink, all right, something that will absorb heat and prevent that chip from overheating. So what are some characteristics of LED lamps? Well, they are relatively high initial cost compared to the fluorescent and the incandescent. All right, as technology changes and matures, that cost is falling. All right, but it's still a little higher. LEDs are durable and resistant to breakage. In general, you can drop them, whereas we all know what happens if you drop an incandescent bulb. All right. They are compact size. They are tiny compared to an incandescent bulb and especially a fluorescent tube. They are very long life and extremely high efficacy, especially the later technologies. LEDs are extremely directional. And as compared to some of the high intensity discharge lights that have similar efficacy, there is no warm up time and they turn on immediately. And finally, LEDs are dimmable. So a fluorescent bulb or a fluorescent lamp required a ballast. An LED lamp requires a driver. All right, and that's something slightly different. But the total LED luminaire is going to include the actual LED, which is way inside there. You can't even see it. Okay, reflectors around the LED to shape and direct the light out of the luminaire. All right, it's going to include that heat sink, all right, to soak up any heat that the LED might produce. All right, and finally, it will include the driver. So to sum up our discussion of these different electrical light sources, I bring your attention to table 14.8 in your textbook, which has a great comparison of the different lamps, their advantages and disadvantages, the applications where you might want to use these lamps, their efficacy, and their lamp life. All right, I'm not going to go through all this now. It's very small on the screen, but I'd like you to please take a look at that in your textbook. Thanks everyone. In this video, we covered the 3 most common lamp types to light our building, and they were incandescent, fluorescent, and LED.